Case number two is that the Ukrainians don't negotiate, don't surrender, and the Russians level Kiev, which I think is the highest probability case. Again, I find it really tough to assess the probabilities, but in my mind, that's what I think the most likelihood is. Then the Russians say they've got two choices. One is to keep Ukraine as Ukraine, or the other thing they've been threatening is take away its sovereignty, which is Russia takes over Ukraine. They either put in a puppet government, it might be too late for that now, or they take it over.
It has been 13 days since Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24, 2022. Yesterday, United Nations confirmed in a statement that it had recorded 406 civilian deaths and over 800 injuries. Horrific videos of families dying by the roadside while trying to flee the warring country have also made rounds on social media. The situation is escalating much faster than anyone could have predicted. Real Vision CEO Raoul Pal is especially disturbed about the consequences of the war on Ukraine and the global economy at large. The macro investor foresees a global recession, an alarming increase in the price of food and other commodities, and a gradual decline into lawlessness, disorder, and anarchy. Pal explains that he foresees three possible scenarios in the coming 2 to 3 weeks, each more alarming and distasteful than its predecessor. The first scenario is a division of Ukraine into East and West. Russia takes East and installs a puppet government, while the Ukrainian government takes over the other half of the country. Listen to Raoul's detailed explanation of the situation and the first scenario he envisions in the coming weeks.
The first thing to do when it comes to geopolitics is to do nothing, is to watch, absorb, and try and understand what the playing field is here, what the ramifications are. Now, I must admit, I didn't think that we'd get this far this fast in terms of Russia's actions within Ukraine. So I've been slightly back-footed, but I've already been expecting a global slowdown in the economy. And so I've been starting to position that way by buying bonds, some gold, some dollars, that kind of stuff. But let me talk about what I'm seeing now, how I'm thinking through this current event, and then some of the ramifications. Now, this is geopolitics. We have no real clue how this will play out. That's why it's so hard. Economic events are much more forecastable. Geopolitical events have many more different nuances, and you have to use that kind of decision tree structure to assess probabilities of all of the things that could happen and trying to figure out, okay, how do I protect myself? Can I make money out of this? What does this all mean for the much bigger picture? So there's a lot here. There are, as ever, in geopolitical disputes, two sides of a story. And when you're trying to analyze geopolitics, you need to be aware of both. So then you can understand what is propaganda, who you're being told by what person for whatever reason. So Russia's been very keen on stopping NATO encroaching on its borders. NATO, on the other hand, is very keen on not letting Russia encroach on its borders, but it's been moving NATO's way. And this whole game has been played out for some period of time. I've written this up in GMI and written it up in Macro Insiders, or Real Vision Pro Macro, is this whole situation that we saw started with Chechnya, then moved to Crimea. This Ukraine story was the Crimea story. Then it's these splintering states. Then it's Ukraine itself. It's been a story that the Russians have had an obsession with in how they want to deal with it for their own sovereign protection. And I don't want to go into the geopolitics of who said what to whom and why. That's not relevant right now. What's relevant is trying to figure out where we are. So I think we have a very narrow window, maybe 2 weeks, maybe less, which is that the Russians have surrounded Kiev pretty much. Now, we understand that the supply chains are not good, but we also understand the Russians have done this a lot of times before with bad supply chains. It's pretty common, and sheer brute force is how they do it. So they're surrounding Kiev now, and what happens in the next few days or couple of weeks is vital. You can see the Israelis have been negotiating on both sides. Maybe there's a negotiation to be had here, and the negotiation will be something like, and again, we don't know because this is geopolitics, and there's a lot of different national pride and a lot of consideration, global consideration, all in this. But let's assume that they can agree a ceasefire, agree some sort of splitting up of Ukraine. So they allow the splinter states. Then maybe they say, well, the government can move and have its own Ukraine, but over towards the west side. And the Russians put a new government in eastern Ukraine. They have West Ukraine, East Ukraine. Something of that sort kind of solves a lot of the problems, although obviously it's still not a good situation. and we'll come on to the big picture still later. But that could see a de-escalation. If we can find some variation around that, where the Ukrainians themselves get some sovereignty, they may lose some sovereignty, or they keep sovereignty of the whole country, but a puppet government gets put in, and the splinter states go to Russia, in which case they're kind of surrounding Ukraine anyway, with Crimea as well. That, to me, is something where sanctions get not dropped, but eased off over a period of time, because everybody feels like that they've negotiated a settlement, and therefore Russia can be rewarded with something. That's the best possible case scenario that I see right now. It's not my highest probability case either.
The second and most probable scenario, Pal explains, is that Russia will level Kyiv and take over Ukraine. If this happens, Pal adds that the sanctions against the transcontinental country remain, plus many other unpleasant consequences that could worsen the global recession. Raoul Pal explains that the first scenario will probably also lead to a worldwide recession, which was imminent anyway, but not on the scale of the second scenario. Here is Raoul Pal describing the second possible outcome he envisions for Ukraine, Russia, and the rest of the world.
Case number 2 is that the Ukrainians don't negotiate, don't surrender, and the Russians level Kiev, which I think is the highest probability case. Again, I find it really tough to assess the probabilities, but in my mind, that's what I think the most likelihood is. Then the Russians say they've got 2 choices. One is to keep Ukraine as Ukraine, or the other thing they've been threatening is take away its sovereignty, which is Russia takes over Ukraine. They either put in a puppet government, it might be too late for that now, or they take it over. Okay, that is a bad situation, a really bad situation, because clearly sanctions are not going away. NATO is going to amass weapons and defenses on the borders. Tensions are going to be extremely high, and the food crisis is going to be writ large. So in scenario A, the food crisis still happens. We still go into a global recession. I think that's almost a certainty now. We were going there anyway, and now this is exacerbating it, and that's not going to go away. I think we're going to miss the harvest season in Ukraine. I don't think there's going to get a chance to harvest when you're at war, and then the planting season gets missed as well. Then we've got the situation with fertilizers, etc. It may be a very difficult agricultural season globally. So that's one. On the second situation, if the sanctions are in place longer, now we've got a full splintering of supply chains that has to happen, and it's forced to happen in a period of time. That is a nightmare situation where Peter Zeihan's world of really dramatically increased food prices leading to civil unrest, crime, all of the things on a global basis is pretty likely. That's really ugly. What that can do for the Middle East, what it can do at other countries. I mean, I'm in Utah right now, and the taxi driver, I always chat to the taxi driver, and I asked him where he's from. He said, Sri Lanka. I said, how's things in Sri Lanka? And he said, terrible. I said, why, what's going on? He said, well, people are out in the streets rioting or protesting. There's massive queues outside the gas stations. I said, yeah, gas prices are high. He goes, well, that's not the issue. The issue is the government's run out of dollars to pay for them. So they just didn't buy enough gas. So there's not enough gas for the country. These are the kind of linkages that happen in situations like this. If Russia remains out of the global system, which looks increasingly likely, then we probably have a big liquidity problem. And that spits around the world in various ways, whether it's countries who are trying to get access to dollars, banks trying to get access to dollars, or whether it's credit spreads widening as people pull back, trying to assess the risks that are going on. And we don't really know. I mean, how does it affect Egypt? How does it affect the Middle East at large? How does it affect all sorts of countries? Again, we don't really know yet. But that's a hugely concerning moment, and that's a big global recession if that takes place, and a massive monumental geopolitical shift as the world really is forced to separate out.
As stated earlier, the scenarios worsen with each new one. First, Raoul Pal sees a divided Ukraine with one part under the complete control of Russia. Then he sees the whole country falling under the weight of the continued attacks. Lastly, for his third scenario, Pal thinks Poland, and by default, NATO, could soon be dragged into the war. That's 30 countries, 27 of them in Europe, plus 3 nuclear weapon member states getting involved in the war. Raoul Pal's detailed analysis of the consequences of such ventures.
Scenario 3 is the worst case, which is, I think that Russia has made it clear that if you oversupply Poland with weaponry to give to Ukraine, then they're going to consider Poland as part of the war. This is Peter Zeihan's point about a potential invasion of Poland. I put that at a low probability, but what the hell do I know? If that is the case, then okay, this is now the worst case situation, because this is NATO versus Russia in a full war. I mean, I can't believe I'm saying these words, but that's where we are. And it's kind of shocking and terrifying. The issue I have with all of this, and I had underestimated it, is the knock-on effects are much larger than I first realized. That how things can spiral in very few decisions into something utterly terrifying that we've not had to face, certainly in our lifetimes, and certainly not in the West. Other regions have, obviously. So it's kind of on tenterhooks. The next 2 to 3 weeks, we will find out whether we have scenario 1, scenario 2, and then after that would be, will scenario 3 come into play?
Pal has vividly painted 3 scenarios for the war. The first scenario seems highly unlikely. Since the first invasion, Ukraine has not shown any signals that it would be willing to surrender anytime soon and hand its sovereignty over to Russia. Even though the two countries have held 3 peace talks, nothing meaningful has come out of these talks. If things escalate to the second or third scenarios, it would be quite dastardly for the global economy, especially for developing countries that do not have the sophistication or unlimited resources to overcome such eventualities. Thanks for watching the video. Remember to smash the like buttons and subscribe to the channel. Also, remember to drop your comments in the comment section below. Thanks and enjoy the rest of your day.